police, and then also what's next? Like, what can we do to make sure that we try to stop the police from?
Well, the license picture is more or less a joke.
Okay,
That's
good.
my little subversive commentary on the whole situation. So that's not really going to solve the problem. All right, so that's more of a like kind of a response to that. But to answer your second question, I think Chuck D laid out a prescription in those lyrics. The brother going to work it out. All right, and that black people need to be aware of what's going on. In other words, may shock you, but all these Richard Pryor things I sampled and so forth, even his first major album, I was hearing those things when I was 7. Sorry, mama, all right. But I was hearing those things secretly when I was 7 years old and just laughing and giggling, and also certain types of music. In other words, I had in my mind a certain reality of what the situation was. All right, I wasn't confused. There's a viral video right now, I think, going around where a young black man is talking about, black people, if they just respond nicely and dress a certain way and do these things, we won't have all these type of problems. All right. So the young man generally have a blind spot about what's going on in history, about the whole idea about dress. Last time I checked, the scene, Martin Luther King was shot while he was wearing a suit, a tie. Malcolm X was dressed well. Medgar Evers was dressed well. A number of different people were dressed well. All right, so, but going back to the whole response, that I think it's going to have to take more of a grassroots effort to kind of stop these things. And even though there is, I guess, overreaching, undefined police powers and so forth, the fact that you now know what the 10th Amendment is, any of you who are going into law, in terms of arguing cases for the police, against the police and things like that, you can consider that. By the way, let me make this, this disclaimer. Just like Frederick Douglass said at the end of his narrative, Incidents of the Slave. Well, that's actually another person, but his narrative, where he basically said that in his particular book, he knew that he was going to get a lot of flack for talking about the Christian slave owners, and people would take that as a slap against Christianity. He wasn't saying that. He was saying he's talking about the slave owners who are practicing some bad version of Christianity. All right, so he had to put that disclaimer in his book. In the same way today, in no way am I against police, law enforcement and so forth. I'm just trying to present some of the historical context of things so that we have a better understanding of what is actually happening, as opposed to trying to sweep everything under the rug and not really explore it, as well as the language that's being used, the language of frustration and anger of the rappers and the comedians themselves.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really an inspiration. I would like to offer more a comment than a question. Since Ferguson, every time when we have a protest in Texas that I have opportunity to participate, the first thing that I say when I can have the microphone open is this police brutality and black bodies treated as disposable. It is not an American thing. It's not an African American thing. It's a diasporic thing. We are treated as disposable everywhere. The same thing that you are doing with hip-hop culture or with blues or jazz, or I can do with samba in Brazil. I can do with capoeira in Brazil that was forbidden by law for years. And criminalization of black people is a reality in Brazil. In these past 10 years, 300,000 black Afro-Brazilians were murdered, most of them by the armed state. So this is a reality for us everywhere. Nobody's going to stop me here and ask my passport. Oh, you are not that black. If the police want to stop me, as well, it's not going to stop you or any of these young folks who are here in Brazil and ask your passport. They are going to stop you because you are black, or me because I am black. So this is a reality for our people everywhere, and the excuse that the apologies that you showed are the same everywhere. If you are behaving yourself, the police was not going to kill you or do anything. So just to offer this comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, that goes back to what I was laying out in the introduction when I was saying about the origins of white supremacy and so forth, going back thousands of years. So thousands of years ago, America was not in the thought in the historical timeline. So white supremacy predates America as such. So thank you for that.
I had a quick question. I enjoyed your presentation as well. But how do we bridge that gap? Forgive me, my family has actually had this conversation of black versus niggas. We black, Democrat Street and niggas. I've had conversations with friends, especially friends from Africa, from the islands. There's a distinct separation of we not African American. That's y'all problem. We fought for our freedom. I don't know what y'all are. Like that's y'all issue. How and especially in the college education scenarios too. I'm college educated. I may have left the hood. They need to figure out on their own. Like how do we bridge that gap? Because obviously it's a divide and conquer, and it's working pretty well. How do we bridge that gap?
That's a good question. As the young lady here was just saying, what's your name? I'm sorry, Danielle. All right, as Danielle was basically saying, this is a diasporic situation, and if we keep it, if we want to keep it in that context, that could be a better way to get everybody on board. I mean, if remember in 1964, so when Malcolm X broke away from the Nation of Islam and started taking a more global approach and started talking about human rights issues and things like that, and going to the UN, that's one way to get these type of things situated. And by the way, speaking of the UN, if you go to, she didn't specifically mention Amnesty International, but there are a number of reports of these types of things going on all across the world, not just in the United States. And interestingly enough, you mentioned the whole thing about people from other parts of the world coming to the States and saying, this is not our experience, this is your experience. Well, from whether you agree with it or not, Trick Daddy had a response to that in one of his lines. He says, you said you're from the islands and your people weren't slaves, you still are.
Yeah.
All right. Yes.
When that conversation happens, right, it has to be some type of continuous conversation about it and some type of action. One of the problems is that we often forget that no group of people are monolithic. So within that, there's always going to be constraints. There's always going to be tussle because there's no one way to be African American. There's no one way to be black. Whereas my mother might like the term Negro or colored. I choose not to rock with those, but I cannot violate her mentality, her existence, her time existence. So therefore, what we have to begin to do is have conversations about the ideal of what colonialism means, the ideal of what Jim Crow meant, the ideal of what apartheid is, and see the commonalities in these things and see a certain particular treatment. There is something that we teach the ideal of there's two paradigms, the study of black people and black studies. And black studies asks, what are the similarities between African Americans and black in the diaspora? When we begin to ask those type of questions and investigate in those type of ways, we'll see responses that can happen communally. We can't solve the problem nationally instantly. We have to work within the confines that we know and build an infrastructure. But the truth of the matter is, one cannot stop a terrorist from terrorizing. So we can't function from fear. We have to function from the mode of saying, okay, our plan and agenda is to do this and to have this in place when this occurs so we can move on, right? And that's just from my perspective.
Good morning. Your presentation was awesome. Thank you for that. I was blessed, it's more of a comment, I was blessed to be amongst a group of black women a couple weekends ago to sit with some White House administrators, or a White House administrator around issues in our community. And one of the things that I posed was a Preserve Life campaign from the perspective that all lives matter. And so I want to thank you because I wasn't aware of the code NHI, and that helps put a greater perspective on why things are happening the way. If they don't see us as human, you're absolutely right. And my passion for this is the fact that I won a landmark case in my hometown against racial profiling when my son was racially profiled in 2007. And that exposed me to so much inhumane thinking on the inside of the structure. So I think instead of having Blackwater be in charge of the curriculum and the training for our police departments across the country, which would make sense to me, would lead to a lot of killing from people that are trained to kill, maybe we should change the language or the objective to preserving life, because at this point, police are becoming the judge, jury, and executioner when they really should be just protected and serving from a preserved life perspective.
Right, and I just want to add one other thing too, and that is, and I think everybody knows this, the vast majority of police officers are doing a tremendous job. All right, we all know this. It's just a rogue element, basically, that's out of pocket, so to speak. And going back to that last argument about black people need to do a better job speaking about black on black crime, well, let's look at the converse. More police officers need to be weeding out some of the despicable elements within their ranks, all right, so that they won't be, guilt by association with some of the rogue individuals. And one other quick thing, and then I'll drop the mic, so to speak. Interestingly enough, there are also, since you talk about law case, there is something in the law called the true threats doctrine. You can look it up, the true threats doctrine, which basically is designed mainly, it came out because of a lot of rap music and so forth, where some rappers have been arrested for quote unquote making terroristic threats in their songs, because and most of them have been acquitted and not gone to jail or anything, but that has happened. Now, what's interesting about this is no one talked to Francis Ford Coppola in The Godfather when cops were being shot. One of the most the great scenes in The Godfather 1 is when Michael Corleone in the little diner shoots the chief of police and walks out, and everybody, yeah! No one says anything about that. He didn't get a letter from the police. James Cameron didn't get a letter from the police when he showed Arnold Schwarzenegger, by the way, a Republican, Arnold Schwarzenegger going into a police station in Terminator 1 and killing 30 cops. No one said that's a terroristic threat. I was recently watching a show, spinoff from the Breaking Bad series, Better Call Saul, where one of the characters, a retired cop named Mike, goes out and kills a couple of his colleagues, police officers who were dirty. No one said anything about that. It's just that Vince Gilligan is showing the gritty reality of blah, blah, blah. All right, so no one says that. But if Ice Cube or Ice-T or so forth come out with songs, then they are under federal investigation and those type of things. Again, going back to the whole idea of who is a threat and, in a way, who is human or not human. Is Lila Willis here, by the way? Because I said I was going to give her a shout out for a presentation yesterday where she was talking about some of the stereotypes and the whole idea, like, for example, the brute Negro stereotype and so forth, how that's been used to justify the mistreatment of black men particularly, and this whole dynamic. I know Professor Andre is big on discussion of the binary and so forth, but there's also this binary in the black community where a black male has to be either subhuman or superhuman, but never human, all right? You're subhuman, you deserve it. You're superhuman, you're Michael Jordan, you can go, but never just allowed just to be a human being. And that's one of the things that I think is important within our culture and so forth in music. I think we need to go to the next session, but thank you for attending. I appreciate it. Thanks.